then we can go wrong. It is in this light that I'm going to say that my guest tonight is somebody who is very, very deep, very vast, highly cerebral. And by the time you start listening to what she has to tell you, you will agree with me that we are lucky to have her on the program tonight. My guest is the executive director of the African Historical Society, in person of Dr. Rachel Titilayo Leslie. By the way, my mother's name is Rachel. Wow. An African Historical Society was founded in the US and South Africa and affiliated with many universities, including Addis Ababa University, that's in Ethiopia, University of Cape Town, and the University of Ibadan, Department of History, Antwi Loki, Department of History and Linguistics. Dr. Leslie is the first African woman or woman of African descent to be awarded a graduate degree in Semitic and Egyptian languages and literatures from the Catholic University of America. African Historical Society is preserving and teaching African manuscripts, cultures, and their language. Remove a language from a people, what you have left is a mere geographical expression. That's where it is important that our language, actually showcases our culture in the true sense of it. In Yoruba, we call language Ede. And why do we call it Ede? Because it's the way by which we communicate. It binds us together. But in the true sense of it, language will actually translate as Eno. But because there are many people who have come together and agreed together that this is the way we want to communicate, so it becomes binding on those people. Tonight, by the time we come back from the market, we are going to go into the day's business. And Dr. Leslie is here to take us through a lot of things that we've never been conscious about ourselves. So, I'll see you when we come back. Thank you.
Sing a song of hope for children. Sing a song of rejoicing spirit. Sing the song of prayer.
On 103.5 FM.
Imagine having the freedom to work, play, and connect without interruptions. That is what fast internet means to us. At Highword Networks, we are passionate about delivering super fast, unlimited internet that is 6 times faster than the competition. Whether you're working from home, running a business, or streaming your favorite shows, we've got you covered. A reliable internet and 24/7 customer support ensure you stay connected always. So what are you waiting for? Join the iWorld Networks family today and discover a seamless internet experience. Call Jeffrey on 081 3058 9466 or visit our website www.iwn.ng to get started. iWorld Networks, connected possibilities.
gbogbo onínáwó pátá tó fi mọ́ gbogbo aláṣẹ chicken tẹ́ fẹ́ lò bó ti wù kó pọ̀ tó DMAGs ni ẹ máa bọ̀ ẹ má wulẹ̀ làágùn jìnnà mọ́ DMAG frozen foods ni ẹ máa bọ̀. Oh yes, whatever occasion it is, chieftaincy ceremony, housewarming, naming, birthday party, or whatever occasion it is, DMAG frozen foods has got your back for whatever number of chickens you may desire. All caterers, worry less, as DMAG is there for you to take care of your chicken supplies. Be it whole chicken or in pieces, DMAGs will cut, will pack, and deliver to wherever you want it. Àjẹpẹ́tẹ́ bá ti ń ronú náwó ẹ ṣá máa ronú DMAGs fún irúfẹ́ iye chicken tẹ́ bá ń fẹ́ bó ti wù kó pọ̀ tó kò sí wàhálà kankan. Ẹ kàn sí DMAG frozen foods lẹ́ni ní plot 2 block F number 6 Olúbàdàn avenue Olúyọ̀lé estate lẹ́bàá Fumac pharmacy Ìbàdàn tàbí lẹ́ka àwọn tó wà ní off new garage Akala expressway lẹ́bàá Anchor mall Katodere Akari junction Ìbàdàn. Fún àlàyé lẹ́kùnrẹ́rẹ́ ẹ pè 09062864238 tàbí 09062968870. Think party chickens, think DMAGs.
You fit fly.
Hello there, are you thinking of embarking on a journey to any country in Europe, America, South America, Asia, Australia, or wherever you may desire in the world for education, tourism, business, or what have you? You are confused on how to go about it. Fit Fly is your go-to company that will help you realize your dream. That is why you're enjoying to talk to us at You Fit Fly for seamless flight reservation, hotel reservation, educational consulting, visa processing, airport transfer, special vacation, travel insurance, holy pilgrimage, and international conferences. Visit us today at Success House, 7 Up Road, Oluyole Estate, Ring Road, Ibadan, or call 0901-111-1190. Website youfitfly.com. At YouFitFly, your travel logistics will be sorted out seamlessly.
On the 103.5 FM.
Sing a song of joy when neighbor. Sing a song of love your neighbor. Sing a song of justice for peace around the world. Sing a song of hope for children. Sing a song of
Yes, welcome back. It's the program Oju'Nu Agba Oye on Honor FM 103.5. Dr. Leslie, good evening. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
And to have this opportunity to speak on your program. As
Thank
you
you.
know, I've been very impressed with your cultural outreach at your gallery
Thank you.
for some time since I first saw it.
Thank you. So, you've been living in Ibadan for how long?
Oh, I've just been here now for a few months. I've been in Nigeria traveling about for the last 2 years.
Okay.
But I've been in Ibadan for a few months now at the University of Ibadan.
Wow. Doing exactly what?
Well, the African Historical Society, as you mentioned,
Okay.
is affiliated with the University of Ibadan History Department. And we're launching a program for the study of African manuscript cultures, which is the first of its kind in Africa.
Oh, really?
And we're very, very excited about that. You know, I liked the name of this program on, you know, what is art?
Yes.
You know?
Thank you.
And so in the context of manuscript cultures, I was thinking about that, you know, that,
Yeah.
you know, before we get into what I'm sure will be most exciting for your listeners, which is the written Yoruba legacy and the
Yes.
Yoruba manuscript culture,
Yes.
or cultures which have been spoken so little about, which have been obscured for many reasons having to do with colonial era paradigms about culture and about oppressing Africans and creating a colonial psychology so that they could be manipulated in the interest of colonial power. So a lot of the knowledge of our great civilizations like medieval Yoruba
Yes.
have been obscured. But before we get to that, I wanted to talk about, when we talk about art, art is
Yes.
such a vast,
Yes.
a vast category, right? Which includes sort of all of the mediums through which people express their ideas, their vision, their emotion, their history,
their life, in general.
their history. So many things are preserved in art, and we'll talk a little bit about archaeology and artifacts and the importance of art in that context. But I think that it's important, as we talk about writing versus art, to understand what the difference between writing and art is, right? Because we have what's called ideograms, which are considered sort of proto-writing, where people express ideas in ideograms.
Yes.
And it's clear that existed in West Africa. You have in Sidibe.
In CBD, yes.
You have also other forms within Yoruba tradition, even within the Adires and all of that. We have
all the symbols of Ibatnodun, and so on and so forth.
Exactly. So those are ideograms, and those are what people refer to as proto-writing.
Yes.
Right? So when do we start to talk about writing? Well, writing is when symbols are associated with parts of speech.
Yes.
Okay? When you can say that a group of symbols are associated with a noun and a verb and a direct object, and that's what within linguistics is then recognized as a full-fledged language once the symbols are associated with speech.
With speech, exactly.
Okay, so what we found is that, first of all, let me share with your audience that what we found was that there were vast manuscript cultures from ancient times. People have heard about ancient Egypt.
Yes.
And one of the things about civilizations that happened during the colonial era is they were all alienated from Africa. So anytime they would find an advanced civilization, they would say some people from outside Africa brought it into Africa, right? So the same thing happened with Egypt, where they said, Egyptian, because it is believed to be the oldest, there's Sumeria, but many people believe there are attributes of civilization that are older within the African continent, within Egypt. And so what they would say is that Egyptian was not an African culture, and they would associate it with Semitic cultures. And many West Africans believe that Egyptian civilization is somehow related to Arab culture. So let me clarify very quickly for your audience that the Arabs invaded Africa in the 7th century AD.
Yes, that's right.
And Egyptian civilization goes back at least to like 5000 BC or more.
So how do you reconcile that?
Exactly. And then in linguistics, what we have now found, as you said, I did my degree in Semitic and Egyptian languages and literatures. And so my foci were Egyptian and Ge'ez, which is classical Ethiopic, another African manuscript tradition with an African alphabet.
Okay.
So now let's get to Egyptian, which is an African language with with several African alphabets.
Okay.
So now we know that ancient Egyptian was not a Semitic language. That means it was not in the same group with Arabic, Hebrew,
any of those
Semitic, Syriac, any of those Semitic languages.
Wow.
We now know that Egyptian was an African language that developed in situ in Africa. It was not brought from outside by anyone.
Yes.
Okay? So now, for the last 10, 20 years, we've begun to study the Egyptian language in its African context.
Okay.
Right? And this is something that West African professors have been calling for a long time. People like Professor Chakanta Diop of Senegal.
Chakanta Diop, yes.
People like Professor Abimbola.
Yes.
Of University of Ibadan.
Yes.
Who did not have the linguistic training, but could see from looking at ancient Egyptian manuscripts that there were undeniable similarities between the culture, what was being depicted, and West African culture.
Okay.
So now we know, as a matter of fact, this language is African, and we need to study it in relation to other African languages.
cultures.
Now, what's so interesting is that when I was doing my degree, I asked them which languages Egyptian had been compared to. And Egyptian had been compared to all sorts of European languages, even German, French, Swedish, all sorts of things.
All of which are not true.
Yes, which are not effective examinations for a language that we now know is African. So that's one of the things we're excited about at the African Historical Society. Is teaching Egyptian in the same department with other African languages, so we can learn more about African languages and Egyptian. Right?
Wow.
Okay, so the Egyptian manuscripts that have been plundered over the last several centuries
I was coming to that.
Are in the tens of millions.
Wow.
And 80% of what has been plundered from Egypt has never even been cataloged. It's just in boxes in the vaults of museums in Europe. Now,
which museum in particular?
Oh, so many. I'm not going to name names because we're working with them.
I understand.
We're working with them to digitize
these
manuscripts and bring them to databases in Africa so that we can digitally repatriate the information and teach Africans how to read them. And so that we can use this to rewrite, reconstruct our history and our knowledge of ourselves, our identities. So Ethiopia, as
so you apparently have access to all this.
We have access, yes.
Great.
We have access.
I'm glad to hear that.
And with Ethiopia as well, one of the most famous plundering of the libraries of Ethiopia happened in the 19th century during the rule of Negus Theodros. And he was collecting all the Ethiopian manuscripts in Ge'ez and Amharic and Tigrian. He was connecting all these manuscripts because there was information on technology, on medicine, and all sorts of things. He wanted to develop Ethiopia, so he built this huge library city complex. And the British invaded Ethiopia on a pretext and plundered the libraries of Ethiopia for a year. They invaded with their armies and they took untold millions of manuscripts.
My good.
And then once the Ethiopian army recovered itself, they set the remnants of the library city on fire.
No kidding.
And it took the Ethiopian army a month and a half to put it out. So let's go across the continent, shall we?
Yes,
From
please.
Ethiopia, we talked about Egypt, and then Northern Africa, because I don't say North Africa, because Northern Africa is part of Africa.
Part of Africa, exactly.
And before the Arabs and the other Middle Eastern groups invaded Northern Africa, some of the indigens were the Amazigh, Berber people. And they also had their own manuscript traditions and their own manuscript cultures.
Wow.
That were largely lost. And then we go across the continent and then we go to Timbuktu.
Okay.
Now, Timbuktu was a center of learning, not just for all of West Africa, but people came across the Sahel from the Middle East to study in
Timbuktu. Yeah, it had a reputation.
Yes. And in fact, Professor John Hunwick, a professor that I had at Northwestern University when I was an undergrad.
Okay, that's Evanston,
Illinois. He worked on the digitization of some of the Timbuktu libraries. And he talked about that he believed that there were up to 25,000 students a year that studied in the academies of Timbuktu.
Wow.
So
these are students from what part of the world?
From all over West Africa.
Okay.
From all over West Africa.
Yes.
Because one of the things we need to do is we need to rid our minds of these colonial borders. Because these colonial borders prevent us from understanding who we are.
Who we are as a people.
As a people, and it prevents us from understanding our interrelationships with people. You know, there were, and I'll tell you, we'll get more into that as we talk about the
Yes.
Yoruba
Please.
manuscripts.
I was coming to that too.
So, in these academies of Timbuktu,
Okay.
people were coming to study from all over West Africa,
Okay.
right?
Yes.
At that time, there was no Nigeria, there was no
Ex-
Togo, there was no Ghana, there was
well,
no...
there wasn't Nigeria until I think 1914, and
Exactly. So we're talking the period that is of particular interest that I want to talk about, although Timbuktu goes further back, is 12th, 13th century, in the so-called Middle Ages. So, and that at that time, none of these colonial borders existed, right? So we
Okay.
have to think in a different way, and we know that the Yoruba Empire, for example,
Yes.
went beyond the
Beyond
borders
the border of,
Nigeria.
yes, yes.
A useful category is Western Sudan. I like Western Sudan, which was the former name of Nigeria. I like the name Western Sudan because it indicates the trans-Sahelian nature of the identities that we're dealing with. Nigeria wasn't called Western Sudan arbitrarily. But let's move forward a little bit and talk about the plundering, because we were talking about the plundering of libraries.
Of our library.
Yeah. So, you know, it's so interesting that what we have been able to identify,
Okay.
what the French admit to,
Okay.
is plundering 7.5 million manuscripts from Timbuktu. 30% of those 7.5 million manuscripts are written Yoruba and Mande.
Tell me
Okay.
more about that.
So, firstly, let me say that one of the things that I find so interesting in terms of Western paradigms is that they teach Africans that that the Mediterranean is the origin of civilization. And yet, every single time they came to Africa, they seem to be plundering our libraries.
Library. What for?
What for? If we don't have anything, right? If we've not contributed to global culture and civilization, why this repeated plunder of African knowledge centers, right? I want to say on that we found, for example, one manuscript from Timbuktu.
Okay.
That shows that West Africans knew that the planets went around the sun 300 years before Galileo. So we're not just talking about history and art. We're talking about science
in this
scientific
respect.
information,
Exactly.
medical information.
Yes.
All sorts of things that were plundered from Africa and taken to the West.
To the West.
You know, maybe another time, because I don't want to dwell on this right now, but I just want to briefly say that, you know, we will talk about how Africans pulled Europe out of the Middle Ages, out of the Dark Ages, through the Moorish transfer of information from places like Timbuktu. But that's a discussion for another day. Let's talk about the Yoruba manuscript.
Yes, please. Let's do that.
Now, let me first start by saying that because we have found written forms of Yoruba,
okay,
we need to reassess how we define Yoruba identity and what it means, what Yoruba culture is, right?
In the true sense of it.
Yeah, what is Yoruba? Because we've talked about orality.
Okay.
As if orality and literary culture are exclusive. As if Yoruba culture was only oral. As if it did not have a literary tradition. So first of all, we know that that is false.
Okay, that's good news.
So let me also put into perspective orality and literary culture and literacy in a more global sense. So for most of European history, for example, people were not literate. Okay, the vast majority of people,
That's what they made us believe.
the vast majority of Europeans
Hmm.
were illiterate during the Middle Ages, for example.
Yes.
During the Middle Ages, only 1% of the
Of the
European
population.
population, about 1% of the
Mhm.
European population could write. And who were those people? Well, those people were priests. So
Hmm.
almost all of the universities of Europe began as priestly societies, as monasteries. Cambridge,
yes,
Oxford.
that's right.
They were
Oxford and all
all-
those. Hmm.
Mhm. They were all monasteries. So knowledge and writing remained within these secret societies, if you will. You had to be initiated into the priesthood
For you to be able
to learn how to
learn
write.
how to write.
Okay, to learn how to write. And this was also true in Yoruba culture, I believe. It's my
Okay,
belief
yeah.
that knowledge,
Like the Ogboni, for instance. You have to be
Exactly.
initiated into the Ogboni for you to have the knowledge.
exactly, or babalawos.
Or Babalawo. Uh-huh.
Exactly. So these custodians of knowledge within Yoruba culture
Mhm.
were also a minority
Okay.
in the same way
Uh-huh.
that you had throughout most of human history.
Okay.
Writing, there were periods where you had, a sort of a democratization of knowledge
Okay.
in certain periods, also in certain ancient periods. But for much of human history and much of the world, knowledge remained within the purview
of this.
of a small minority
Minority
into which you
elites.
needed to be initiated, a secret society of some kind, a brotherhood
Mhm.
of some kind that you needed to be initiated into in order to
Have
learn how to
access.
write,
Uh-huh.
learn mathematics.
Hmm.
All of these things were secret, quote unquote,
was
secret
that
knowledge.
was that deliberate, or what do you think that was all about?
I think it has to. I think it has to do with power. I think definitely that
And
secrecy.
control.
Yeah.
Interesting.
My belief is that the control of information has
Yeah.
to do with the establishment and maintenance of power structures and
There you go.
and power relations in the society, so that what we see if we look at Europe, which is a nice sort of example because it's rather contained.
Contain,
and,
exactly.
and therefore lends itself to certain kinds of analyses and observations. You see that you don't get the majority of the population becoming literate until the late 19th and 20th centuries.
Okay.
Up until that time, even in the Enlightenment Europe,
Mhm.
only about 20% of the
Percent were
population
literate.
were literate.
Mhm.
And in the medieval period is only 1%. So you see that in these cultures, like if you look at, medieval England, for example, the play was very important.
Mhm.
Theater was very
Theater
important.
was important. Yes.
And so you have orality existing parallel,
Mhm.
side by
Two.
side with
Mhm.
literary culture, but literary culture was the purview of a very remote, specialized brotherhood, really, because it's a
Okay.
priesthood
Okay.
that controlled access to knowledge. So, however, one doesn't say that it's just an oral culture. You don't say that Shakespearean England
uh-huh.
is oral because only 1% of the population could write.
Could write.
Correct?
Yeah, yes. Yes.
Okay, so
You're right about that.
similarly, let's get back to Yoruba culture, where again we find that written knowledge was around secret societies.
What form of writing were the Yorubas doing? Yes.
Yes, doing in the Middle Ages.
In the middle. Uh-huh.
So what's interesting is that, like, for example, now when
Okay.
you write Yoruba,
Yes, like the R, B, D. But what form of
yes. So when you write Yoruba now, you use the Latin
There
alphabet,
you go. Mhm.
right? And yet we don't say that Yoruba is a Latin
No.
or a Romance language,
No,
right? No, we
no.
don't. Because you're just using the alphabet to write the Yoruba words.
Okay.
So in medieval Timbuktu,
Timbuktu.
Yorubas
research.
were using and adjusted Arabic.
Okay.
They were taking Arabic letters, which are phonetic.
Did they already have contact with the Arabic at the time?
Well, in Timbuktu,
Okay.
there was contact.
Okay.
In Timbuktu, there was contact.
Okay.
And Mansa Musa had converted
Okay,
to
that's right.
had converted to Islam.
Yes, you're right.
So Yorubas were apparently going to Timbuktu to study or to teach Yoruba sages, and they were using Arabic symbols to write out the phonetics of Yoruba.
Of the Yoruba.
Of Yoruba. So we at the African Historical Society, we actually worked with, we're working right now with a scholar who we had translate a Yoruba 13th century Yoruba manuscript from the what they call Ajami, which I have a problem with that category, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
And-
Ajami.
Ajami, and translated it from the Yoruba Ajami, that is Yoruba written with Arabic,
Symbol.
yes, in the same way you use Latin now, but used because Arabic is phonetic.
Arabic is phonetic,
Yeah.
yes.
So they write that Yoruba sounds using that alphabet. So then we translated it from that into Yoruba with the Latin alphabet, the way
Okay.
you write Yoruba. And then we transcribed it, rather. And then we transcribed it from that
Okay.
into English. So we have the 4 exemplars, the original
Okay.
manuscript, the transcription
Transcription.
into Yoruba, the way you're accustomed to writing it now, and
Yes.
then that transcription into English. So the 3.
Okay.
So now what that means, okay? Now it's so interesting because when I talk to some historians who have been trained in sort of the in Yoruba history,
Okay.
the way that it is normally taught, let's say the status quo approach to Yoruba
To
history.
Yoruba history.
One scholar says to me, he doesn't believe that it's possible that Yoruba was written in the 13th century. So I said to him, but we have this manuscript here
to prove that.
to prove that Yoruba was written in
Wow.
the 13th century. And I asked him, I said, why don't you believe
Believe, exactly.
that it's possible? And he said to me, because the Yoruba that we speak originates from Oyo, and Ibadan did not yet exist in the 13th century. And that's why I say to you, we are going to have to reanalyze
Yes.
our
I think it is high
understanding
time we began to do that.
what it means to be Yoruba. When, exactly what are we defining as Yoruba,
As
right?
Yoruba.
So now, I personally have always understood, I don't believe that Yoruba is a tribe. Okay?
Okay.
I believe that when you're talking about empire building
Yes.
people,
That's what Yoruba is.
you're not talking about a tribe, because a
Yeah.
tribe is a group of people that
Be-
can be traced to common ancestors.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Now we have a myth of common ancestors with Oju'Nu
Yes.
and
Orumila and so on and so
Ilefe,
forth. Ilefe,
and,
yes,
this whole
exactly.
myth of a common origin.
Mm-hmm.
However, when you're talking about empire builders,
Yes.
empire builders absorb other people.
There you go. Yeah, that's exactly what an historian was telling me. That it was Oduduwa who actually, who extended the Yoruba, empire to as far as to Kogi, to other parts, even beyond Nigeria. But question here, The word Yoruba, how did it come about?
You know, I was just thinking about that. I was just thinking about that because that was the next part of our discussion, right?
Okay.
Because what I said to him was, okay, I said my response to him was twofold. One, I don't think there's been enough excavation of Oyo to know when it was first settled.
It's settled, exactly.
Right? We know Ife was settled in the 2nd millennium BC.
Yes, that's
Okay.
right.
So we need to do more excavation of Oyo, number one, before we can be sure of that. We should not be following British oral history.
No.
British
It's
oral
our time
history.
we do away with that. Yes.
And in addition to that, I said to him, you know, on this Yoruba, you know, if we're saying that the Yoruba are empire builders,
Okay.
then I'm sure it wasn't just Oduduwa who was absorbing people. I'm sure it was a continuous process.
Exactly.
And people are always being absorbed. So you see this polyglot nature of Yoruba too, with Ijebu version of Yoruba and
the
Ife
Kogi
and the
people,
Kogi, and everyone has this. You can hear as if other languages are underneath.
Underneath, exactly.
Okay, so these are it's an empire building people who are absorbing people, and everyone is under the linguistic umbrella of Yoruba, right?
Yes.
Okay, so then you have people as far as Mali, as Timbuktu, writing in Yoruba, right? So those were Yorubas. We have to think about how they got there.
Yes.
What they were doing there, right? But it's an expansion of who we are. We're not limited by these borders of Nigeria. So back to this word Yoruba. You can have people that are speaking Yoruba that may not be called Yorubas. Where does this word Yoruba come from?
Where does this word Yoruba come from?
Because it doesn't have an etymology in Yoruba.
In Yoruba, there you go.
Right?
Yes.
It doesn't have an etymology in Yoruba.
Yes.
So there's this whole discussion about the origin of that word. Now, some people say it was Northerners who started calling Yorubas
like the
Yoruba.
Yoruba.
Yes, Yoruba. And other groups appending that name to them. And I had a discussion with our friend yesterday, and we were talking about how, for example, Christians were not always called Christians, right?
Yes.
It was in Antioch that people began to call them Christians.
Yes.
However, that does not mean there were not thousands of people following the teachings of Christ, and living as Christians, but not called Christians. Right?
That makes sense. All the sense in the world.
You know, so similarly with Yoruba.
Wow.
You see where I'm going with this?
Exactly.
Similarly with Yoruba, we may have had people who were speaking Yoruba who were Yorubas, but not yet known
as Yoruba. That somebody once said that the word Yoruba only just existed about 200 years ago. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a raging debate. And it's very, very interesting to me. I mean, for me as a linguist, it is definitive that there is no etymology for the word in Yoruba. That's definitive.
Yeah.
Now, being half Ijebu.
Wow. Yeah, your mom was actually from Ijebu Igbo to be precise, right?
Yes, and my grandfather from Agowe.
Oh, really?
The Ogundikbes.
But your dad happened to be...
My dad is
from America.
Yes, is
Jamaican, American.
Right.
Wow,
and
this
I was born in Paris.
You know what, Dr. Leslie? This is supposed to be a program in both English and Yoruba. But I know your Yoruba is not all that, you know.
That's an understatement.
So let me just take a little time to explain to our Yoruba listeners.
Please
do. And I'm going to beg you to say, please, this is not going to be a one-time visit, and that's it. If you can come next week, you have time to come. I will be happy to host you because we're just now opening up, where we really need to go. And but time is not on our side. So, ẹ̀yin èèyàn mi nílé, nǹkan tí dókítà Leslie tán ti ń sọ látàárọ̀ ni bí àwa Yorùbá bá ti ṣe pàtàkì tó. Bí ó ṣe jẹ́ wípé àwa Yorùbá a kọjá bí àwọn òyìnbó ṣe fi wá wé. Bí àwa Yorùbá bá ti ṣe tán káàkiri àwọn ilẹ̀ aláwọ̀ dúdú míì bíi Egypt, Sudan àti bẹ́ẹ̀ bẹ́ẹ̀ lọ. Ó ní gbogbo nǹkan tí wọ́n ti ń sọ látàárọ̀ pé kókó bẹ̀ tiẹ̀ jùlọ ni wípé Yorùbá ti ní àkọọ́lẹ̀ tí èèyàn lè sọ wípé èdè àwọn Yorùbá rèé, tí ì ṣe pé wọ́n sọ pé wọ́n yìí kọ Yorùbá kì í kọ nǹkan lẹ̀, ọpọlọ nìkan agbárí nìkan náà kàn gbé gbogbo ẹ̀ sí tóyìnbó ń pè ní oral language. Wọ́n ní èdè Ifá látẹnusẹ́nu ni, kò sí pé wọ́n kọ́ lẹ̀ níbì kan. Arábìnrin Leslie wá ń sọ fún wa wípé àwọn tiẹ̀ ti ká ọ̀pọ̀lọpọ̀ ẹgbẹ̀rún lọ́nà ẹgbẹ̀rún àfihàn ìdánilójú wípé àwa Yorùbá a ti ní àkọọ́lẹ̀ láti ọjọ́ tó ti pẹ́. Ó dùn mí pé àkókò gbà á láàyè, ṣùgbọ́n mo máa bẹ arábìnrin, ó máa padà wá, àwa ṣe tún mú lójú. Ó ti ṣí sọ lórí eégún báyìí. Kí ni àwọn eégún yẹn, kí ni wọ́n wá ń wí, kí ni wọ́n ń sọ, ló máa jẹ́ nǹkan tá a máa bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí ní máa ṣí sọ, tá a máa tẹ̀síwájú pẹ̀lú ẹ̀ látọ̀sẹ̀ tó lọ lágbára Ọlọ́run. Gbogbo ìgbàkigbà tá a bá lórí ọ̀fẹ́ látọ̀sẹ̀ tó ń bọ̀, gbogbo ìgbà tá a bá lórí ọ̀fẹ́ àti gbé padà wá, so that ẹ lè mọ̀ yìí pé àwa Yorùbá kọjá bí wọ́n ṣe ń fi wá pè. Ẹ lè mọ̀ pé àwa Yorùbá kì í kàn ṣèyàn kan ṣákálá tí a lẹ́sìn, tí a ní ìtàn gẹ́gẹ́ bóyìnbó ṣe ń wí. Mo dúpẹ́ lọ́wọ́ yín gan pé ẹ fetí àtọkànbá wa lọ, bó ti yẹ pé àfitìfitì ni ètò alẹ́ yìí, ṣùgbọ́n síwájú àti síwájú sí a máa tú iṣu désàlẹ̀ kòkò. Let me seize this opportunity to thank my dear sister. Ọmọ Ìjẹ̀bú wẹ́wà.
That's just one part of my identity.
Wow. So you are a Nigerian by every right.
I definitely have ancestors buried in the soil. And my grandmother, she also started Nigeria's first teachers training college here in Okeado.
Really?
In Ibadan.
Wow.
Yeah.
But you were born in the US, were you?
I was born in Paris, France.
In Paris, France?
Yes. My father was doing his PhD for mathematics at the Sorbonne with Henri Caton. And I was born in Paris and then grew up in the United States with frequent visits to Jamaica.
Wow,